Welcome to Intercom, a product, the podcast that explores building software in the era of AI. I'm Michelle Fitzpatrick, Senior Director of Product at Intercom, and today I'm joined by our Senior Product Designer, Pranava Tandra. So, Pranava recently wrote a fantastic blog post called Designing for Clarity, and it detailed how we restructured Intercom's information architecture and navigation to keep pace with our product's growth while making it easier for our users to navigate and for our teams to build on. So, in this episode, we're going to unpack the journey behind this redesign to talk about what we learned, the challenges that we faced working on this together, and how clarity became our North Star. So, Pranava, welcome to the show.
Hi, Michelle. Hi, everyone.
Okay, Pranava, let's start at the beginning. So, what was it that prompted you and the team when we were looking at this problem to really rethink Intercom's information architecture? Like, was there a specific moment or feedback or something that really was sparked this project?
Yeah, so I think for a long time, Intercom had been evolving rapidly. We had new features, new capabilities, and especially in the AI and automation space, we've built so many things in the recent years. But I think the way the product was structured hadn't kept up. We started seeing signals from customers, just confusion about where to find things, difficulty in onboarding, and even internal teams struggling to explain where a feature lived. One moment that really hit home was when a customer said, I know Intercom can do this, but I just don't know where to start or how to start. That kind of feedback made it clear that maybe it was our IA that, mm, and it wasn't just like a navigation issue, right? Like it was mostly probably the way we had structured our information around the product. And it was directly affecting how people use the product. So I think that was one of the key moments in like thinking about the product deeply. Yeah.
Yeah, that really resonates hearing it. I think I think an interesting thing about our product is that it's now like over 10 years old. And with that time just brings just a huge amount of product. We ship at a really fast pace. So just the volume of product that we have that is built up and trying to make sense of where things fit. And as things change, it makes you kind of have to go back and rethink, hey, did our prior decisions of the information architecture of the product hold up as this is growing? So I think there's always these tipping points. And it feels like we started reaching a tipping point again, which is
Yeah. I think it was really nice that we took this up as an initiative last year. Obviously, we worked together in the new user experience group, and you have a broader perspective about how things change because you've been here for a long time as well. But I think really doubling down on like the way we structure our app during that initiative was like very interesting because then we could deeply think about the whole app and then bring more structure to it. Yeah.
Pranav, you described restructuring the IA as rebuilding the train station, like without stopping the train. And that's such a vivid analogy. Can you walk us through what the process actually looked like day to day of rebuilding this train station?
That analogy really stuck because it perfectly captured the challenge. We were making major structural changes while ensuring customers could still use Intercom without disruption. On a day to day level, it meant auditing the entire product, identifying what existed, what was redundant, what was confusing, and then mapping out the new structure and stress testing it against like real user workflows, right? And then it was also about like running usability tests in parallel with development to validate decisions in real time, coordinating with multiple teams, engineering, marketing, support, because even small changes had like ripple effects. A big part of this was sequencing. We couldn't just flip a switch and roll out to everything at once. Instead, we introduced changes gradually using feature flags, beta tests, and an opt in, opt out flow. This let us gather feedback and understand where users were struggling before making anything permanent. So, to give you an example, one of the biggest shifts was how users access the app section, the App Store section. Previously, customers were used to starting from the left hand nav bar, almost like taking a familiar train route. But in the new structure, we moved apps to the settings, which made logical sense because app setup and management align more with like product configuration, right? So it's like how train stations in London are organized, if I may say. If you're traveling east, say to Cambridge, you naturally take a train from the Liverpool train station, right? If you're traveling and if you're heading west to Oxford or Wales, you depart from the Paddington station. It's, you know, that was like the vivid analogy that came to my head. And I was like, you don't question it because the system is structured around like logical directions. The same principle applied to Intercom's IA redesign as well. Instead of having like setup related functions scattered across the product, we align them in one direction in one space, all configuration and setup under settings. And this reduced fragmentation and made navigation a lot more intuitive. Even if it meant users had to readjust their habits initially, but I think it's paying off in the long term.
Interesting. One of the things you mentioned a lot was that clarity was the foundation of every decision that you're making. What does clarity mean to you as a designer, and how do you ensure that it guides your work?
Yeah, to me, clarity is about like reducing cognitive load, making sure people never have to stop and wonder, where am I? What do I do next? Where do I go next? So this ensured clarity in a few ways. So consistency, naming conventions, hierarchy, iconography, all have to be predictable. Now imagine you reach a train station again, and the train you're supposed to board just has a train number on it, right? And not telling you where it goes. That would create confusion. And the second one is about like progressive disclosure, showing the right amount of information at the right time so the product didn't feel overwhelming. Again, imagine you reach a train station and there were three trains scheduled to depart at the same time from the same platform. Wouldn't that be confusing? So it's almost about like using some of these real world examples and mapping them to like digital principles that can help you improve your intuition as well. And the last one is about like real user validation. If we thought something was clear but the users hesitated, that is a red flag. And most of the times this goes unnoticed. So yeah, it's almost like at every single point we're thinking like, hey, is this clear enough? Maybe we have to test this again with users. What seems clear to us may not be clear to the users.
Interesting. And during this project, you spoke to dozens of users during the whole process. What were some of the surprising insights or aha moments kind of that changed your perspective on how customers interact with Intercom, how they understand the structure of the product or what the product is capable of?
Yeah, I think like one big realization was how intent based people are when using a product like Intercom. Users just don't come into the product and think, let me browse around. They actually come with a job to do. And that meant our IA had to be built around jobs and workflows and not just categories. Another surprise was how much familiarity mattered. Even when something wasn't ideal, long time users had built muscle memory around something. So in my head, it always felt like, hey, whatever changes we make, they have to feel evolutionary and not disruptive. So yeah, that's how I thought like we were able to achieve some of those aha moments, seeing real world users use our, prototypes or even like some of the experimental builds we put together.
That's really interesting, Pranava. I know one of the other things that you mentioned in the blog post was around simplifying without sacrificing depth. So, how did you balance that need for simplicity of the IA and the navigation of the product to really simplify what is a large, complex, and growing product?
Yeah, this one's an interesting one. The key was to not confuse simplifying with removing, right? Removing is easy and it can also feel disruptive to some customers. So we weren't dumbing things down, we were making them more intuitive. I think a good example is our automation and AI features. I think instead of like burying them in different sections, we created like a dedicated space. That didn't reduce their power to accessing these different things, but it made them easier to discover and use. So, another principle we followed was scalability. Like every decision had to work not just for today, but for the next set of features we would add. So, that meant like building a system and not just like rearranging a menu.
But yeah, that really resonates. I think kind of back to your analogy of like the train station. I mean, things are just constantly evolving. So while we took on this project to improve where things have kind of maybe gone off track, I think we were also trying to think about how can we set it up so it fixes the problems now, but gives us like a good foundation. So it's kind of like scaling out that train station for expanding in the future. I know, and like I think that example that you mentioned there, the AI and automation section, this was one of the ones that was, I think, quite a debate for us of what parts of the product to combine together. And again, also referencing what you were talking about there with the, the intent of the jobs that customers come to do, and realizing that these two were very connected. People thought about and used these together in their workflow. Like, how maybe talk a little bit more to me around like how you approach designing some of these new spaces, and the, the role that you see them playing as the product evolves, as we're looking into the next year ahead of what's coming, particularly as we're focusing so much on the AI and automation side of Intercom.
Yeah. So I think the challenge with AI and automation is that while they're incredibly powerful, they can often feel abstract or scattered across different parts of the product. We have that today. Like there is AI in almost all parts of our product, and it is so good. It is helping all of our customers and users really become more efficient at the task they do. However, we wanted to make these capabilities feel a lot more tangible and accessible, easier to set up. So instead of like embedding them in like multiple areas, we created like a dedicated hub. I think this approach serves two key purposes. The first one being it signals importance, like that AI isn't just like an add on, it's a core part of how Intercom works. It improves discoverability. Users now have like a clear entry point and explore and leverage automation. I think even during the process, I've debated this a lot with a lot of my peers that, hey, a new user coming into the product wouldn't probably have like a great idea of the difference between AI and automation. For them, it would be like, oh, yeah, it just makes my job simpler, right? So I went with that intuition. And we are in an era of like really rapidly evolving AI products. And this space, I think, will continue to expand. AI driven tools are becoming essential in like automating repetitive tasks and enhancing efficiency. And over time, I think we'll see more sophisticated ways to integrate them seamlessly into workflows. So I imagine AI and automation will be front and center to what Intercom does in the very near future as well. We already do that. I think we'll add a little more emphasis to it. And as these capabilities become more advanced and deeply embedded in like all of the user workflows, we'll likely need to make space for them in a way that reflects their growing importance. So maybe in the future, we'll probably have like a very prominent AI section back on the nav bar because that is so front and center to what Intercom does. So right now we structured AI into a dedicated hub to help users onboard, adopt these tools easily. And as our AI offerings expand, we'll probably need to rethink about how we integrate and communicate them with like the broader product experience as well. So the way people interact with AI today might not be the way they do in like a year or two. So this is an evolving space and we'll need to adapt the AI to match that growth.
Yeah, that fully resonates. I do remember at the very start of the project, a big debate that we had was around, should we put all of the new AI products that we were building in one place, or should we distribute it across the whole product? So we kind of group things by their more functional areas, and AI is like this horizontal layer across the product, or should we give it a home? And we really debated those two approaches quite a lot because I think as we were developing the AI side, we didn't really know yet. Like, it's much harder to see a year into the future or more around what was going to evolve. And then I think we ultimately came to the decision, and especially from talking to customers, of keeping quite a lot of it very centralized and giving it a home because it was such a new thing for customers, so they could see and discover it together in one place, particularly the AI agent, which was the bulk of kind of the AI that we were building. Even though there's AI scattered across other parts of the product, in the inbox and in the help center and lots of places where it can assist customers. So I think that's like a really interesting one around how we made the decision to group it. And now it has a home that is growing and expanding and changing yet again. One of the things that's always fun to do is kind of at the end of a project, look back and kind of reflect on some of the biggest challenges and trade-offs that we face. So like as you look back, like what do you think were some of the toughest decisions that we had to make?
One of the hardest trade offs was balancing familiarity versus improvement. Some parts of the old I think, weren't great, but people had learned to work with them. We had to be careful about changing too much and too fast. Another challenge was cross functional alignment as well. Changing IA isn't just a design decision, it's a strategy decision. It impacts documentation, onboarding, support, and getting everyone on the same page took a lot of negotiation and time as well. So I think a tough decision was around like default entry points. Again, going back to our AI and automation discussion, right? I think we've debated during this process like where should users land first? Should AI and automation be front and center? And if we were to do that, what are the trade-offs we are happy to take on, right? Like how does this affect like some of our other products? So even now, I think we're in the space where we're debating like should AI and automation be front and center? How should we prioritize this against like inbox workflows? We had to make obviously these calls based on like data, usability testing, and a lot of intuition given the time we're in, right? The era we're in. So a lot of trade-offs actually I can think of with respect to each entry point we've discussed from the main navbar, but great learnings as well.
I've worked on a few of the IA projects at Intercom, and I find it's one of the places where people have a lot of very strong opinions and very like instinctive opinions. And it really always maps to what their mental model of the product is. And of course, internally, our mental models of our product are very different from our customers. We know it inside out, we know it like past, present, and future. We think about it so differently. And I do think that kind of alignment and getting everyone to think about and agree on some of the decisions around grouping and naming and position of the core parts of our product when we were all thinking about the product so differently. I think it's kind of like where your mental model and system model collide is with like the IA and navigation in a product. And I think that that was one of the ones for us, I think getting the alignment across different teams and especially teams that would think about the part of the product they were working on is that was the center of their universe. So changes to that they have really strong opinions on it, the naming, the positioning, because they had such a that was the center of what they thought about the whole product from their perspective.
100%. And I think like it makes total sense, right? Like it is working for some of our customers. Actually, most of our customers, our current users are happy with some of these things already. But we were focusing so much on like the holistic experience, new users and current users, and how this would impact like the whole foundation of what we want to build for in the future. So all all concerns are warranted. Like it made complete sense, and it was so important to hear their points of view as well. I would like to like go back and think about one example. In fact, on we like you remember this incident with like the spam inbox. I would like to quote that. Yeah. Um so we redesigned not just the primary IA like nav IA, we also made a lot of changes to like some of the internal product areas as well, like the way people consumed information at first look. And one of the design decisions I made at that point of time was like, hey, people don't need to see spam inbox. We should just hide them in the first go. And then we took this to new users. They didn't notice it, probably because it's not important to them, right? And so it was not like we didn't kill the feature, but we just hid it one level deeper. And it is something that you can decide to pin or unpin. So that was the design change we made. However, even taking it to like beta for current customers, we didn't see a lot of impact. But on the day of GA, like the full release, we saw all hell break loose. There were a lot of customer queries about, hey, where did my spam inbox go? I use it all the time. Why have you hidden it? And it was not like hidden, it was just like, you know, you can either pin it or unpin it. So even those little decisions matter so much. So obviously, we were on it in a couple of hours. We reverted that decision and we made sure that It was all fine. But like that little decision of like, hey, current users already use this. We should just let it be instead of like making it customizable and hiding it by default. So I think like just looking back at some of those decisions, these are all such great learnings. And thank God we were able to revert them back on time on the release day. But
Interesting because it's like the volume of usage in some places was low, but the value was high. And I think when you just look at the data, that's really hard to see. I think we had other places where we saw like a high volume of usage, but then people bounced out and it was that they were going in accidentally. They were clicking on something, they thought it was something else and they bounced out. So on first blush, you might think, oh, a lot of people are going there, they must be using it, but they weren't. And then something like spam where not that many people were using it. In fact, the ones that were actually really valued that usage. So I think it's quite interesting that sometimes just looking at the data and kind of like clicking around data just doesn't tell the full picture of where people really get value out of things in the product. And sometimes you just have to like learn by trying as well. You can't research absolutely everything in advance or it just takes quite a long time. So I think that was a good one of where we released it, discovered a pattern of usage that was very valuable, but that we didn't really know existed that much or we hadn't really considered as much. And then we're able to make kind of a quick decision on the back of it.
yeah, that was something.
I think like finally then I'd love to kind of ask you, what advice would you give to other designers or teams who are embarking on their own IA redesigns or facing similar challenges in their growing products? Like any lessons that you'd want them to keep in mind?
Uh, yeah, like just looking back at my own journey and reflections from that. The first thing is like never start with the UI. Like sometimes we think like, oh, rearranging the menu is going to like give the clarity, but it doesn't work that way. You always have to start with like real user workflows. Like how are people actually using the product? Where do they go? So if I need to travel from here to Glasgow, what are the different trains I take to reach there, right? So it's almost about that. So the best IA is in the first attempt, it's never neat, but it maps to how people think and work. So doing your basics of like card sorting with like set of users and tree testing, all of these are like important to draw those real workflows. And the second thing is like testing early and testing often. During the project, my PM and I, we took the products we had, the prototypes and the experimental builds we had, we took it testing almost every week. And we had customer insights on all of these prototypes and user testing flowing in. And this helped us understand if the structure made sense. And then, like, thinking in systems and not in screens is so important. So, if you're changing the position of something, how does it impact like the whole journey after the position change? So you actually have to think in systems and not just in that one specific screen. So, and that's also important because your IA should scale as the product grows. And I think we've touched upon this. So if you just change something on the screen, it may not scale later. We need to be like careful about that. So that was the third one. And finally, I think you have to communicate constantly. Your IA, like the IA changes that you're making affect every team. So you have to keep them involved. One thing I think we did really well during the project was have our own Slack and communicate the changes week on week and how we were like progressing about thinking about them, building them, implementing them, testing them. So you really need to communicate and collaborate with all the key stakeholders and keep them involved. So apart from those things, right? Like one thing that we must always remember is like clarity beats cleverness. Sometimes we think like, I did this change and it is so clever, it just works, but actually it doesn't. It's not clear enough. If something requires an explanation, it's probably too complicated. And these are some of the things that I've thought about deeply while designing for, the IA project as well. Even things like arranging information and ensuring the information flows using the right animation patterns. How does it flow in? Does it appear on hover? Does it appear on click? All of these are more downstream, but having like a full view of like the whole process end to end would like really help you probably design a nice experience with the right information broken down at all points of time. Yeah.
That makes total sense. I think it's interesting to think about the depth that you have to go through, when you talked about, like, thinking about systems, not screens. So you have to breaking everything down and actually spending a lot of our time just drawing out, like, a diagram of the product versus the actual UI of the product. And then when you put it all together and present it, I think one of the best judges of, like, is this clear and is there clarity, is when you show it to someone, they're kind of underwhelmed. They look at it and they go, "Yeah, obviously." Like, "What why did that take so long?" And you're like, "Oh my god, we've done it." That's clarity. Something like an IA and navigation structure of a product should be not noticeable. People shouldn't think about it. It should just feel just like part of the journey of using the product, and done well, it isn't noticeable. So I think it's quite an interesting one where people saw it at the end and they were like, "Yeah, that makes perfect sense. What took so long?" And we're like, "Wow, we've done it."
Yeah. 100%. Yeah.
Well, perfect. Well, thank you for joining us today, Pranava. I really enjoyed the conversation. If you'd like to read more, check out Pranava's blog post, Designing for Clarity, which you'll find linked in the episode description. For more insights on how we're building software in the AI first world, sign up for our Intercom on Product newsletter at intercomonproduct.substack.com. And as always, thank you so much for listening, and we'll catch you next time.